Alrighty, welcome back to Newsfighters, and this month our special interview guest, I haven't had him on for 2 years, believe it or not. It's an old friend of mine, the host of Irrational Fear, Dan Ilic, the man with whom comedy would not exist in Australia. How you going, Dan?
That's very generous of you. Yes, I actually made comedy. I invented comedy in Australia. Anybody who wants to do comedy in
Half of the weekly last week was people you discovered.
That's it. Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. Why hasn't the weekly got me on? I've been doing this for so long. Oh my goodness, this is the problem. This is the problem. No, you're welcome. You're welcome, Australia. I find them. I polish them up and I let them go. That's my job. That's my job at Irrational Fear. No, we are very lucky to have a lot of funny people come through Irrational Fear, and a lot of people whose careers are just coasting, like my own. So, it's just one of those things. It's, they say you do Irrational Fear twice in your career. Unlike me, it's turned out to be my whole career. So there you go.
Normally I'd have you on to discuss Irrational Fear, but given that we're now on the Irrational Fear podcast feed, I think people are already subscribed to Irrational Fear and are quite familiar with it.
That's right. And if you're not, I'm really sorry. This would have been a very confusing episode for you because this is News Fighters. We're basically getting Dylan on to do this show once a month means, one, I can have a week off once a month. And two, Dylan has a place for his excellent show and he can get paid to do it. So
excellent. I like this.
That's
win-win.
That's the great thing about this show.
So in lieu of talking to you about Irrational Fear, which everyone knows about, I guess we'll get to plugging the upcoming events at the end. But I figured we'd talk maybe about, you're a great news brain, you're a great politics brain. I thought maybe we'd look ahead at the year in news and politics, and maybe a few predictions. I guess first up, we're going to have the New South Wales state election in March. You are quite familiar with the teal movement at the last federal election. What's going to happen in the state election? Are we going to get some teals up? Are we going to get rid of Perrottet? What's going to happen, do you reckon?
I mean, there's a handful of teals running, so it gets really tricky because unlike the federal election, there is no mandate for preferential voting. So there's no rules on preferential voting. That means
it's optional. It's optional, yes.
It's optional, yes. So it gets really confusing. And so people will just go in there and they'll just put a 1 next to whoever they want and walk away. Whereas if they go through the whole ballot and label every single candidate box with a number, there are more chances that a candidate, like an independent climate-focused candidate, like many of the Climate 200 candidates, will get in. I reckon there's probably a lot of energy around a couple, particularly up in the Northern Beaches. Jackie Scrooby is running up there. It seems like she could probably pull together a really compelling campaign and find herself with a seat. So that's exciting. On the podcast, we had Judy Hannon from Wollondilly Shire and the Southern Highlands last week. So if you listen to that, or if you're new to the podcast, go back and listen to that. Really interesting chat with her about how effective she might be able to be if she got a seat. And then there's a couple of others, Lane Cove. There's a couple of other North Shore seats that may turn teal. But I think Scrooby's probably the most likely. She's up in the Northern Beaches. She comes from Sophie Scomps's campaign. She was the chief of staff of Sophie Scomps's campaign back in the day. She's an environmental defence lawyer. She knows climate back to front. She is very much across PEP 11, which is the big fossil fuel project off the Northern Beaches. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that plays into her favour, and not to say the least, she is benefiting from Sophie Scomps's huge grassroots campaign and a mailing list and volunteers. So that's a really interesting one, and that one will be, I think that'll be a shoo-in. If she doesn't get in, I'll be very surprised.
But correct me if I'm wrong, I noticed the Teals at the federal election, there was a big anti-ScoMo, anti-liberal movement, but I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I'm brainwashed here, but I feel like the New South Wales Liberals are definitely wearing their green on their sleeves. They're trying to be a bit more green than the federal Liberals. Is that a fair assumption?
No, that is an accurate assumption, and they've played that card really well. You see a lot of great initiatives from New South Wales, and partly because the New South Wales is actually a minority government right now, so they need to collaborate with a whole bunch of the other parties. So mainly the independents, people like Alex Greenwich, and the Greens. So it's kind of funny because the Liberals are forming coalitions with the Greens in New South Wales, so they can go against Labor. That is kind
Yes.
of the fun, weird coalition we're in right now. Another interesting thing that passed was not only on climate, so stuff like RES, the Renewable Energy Zone up in northeastern New South Wales, which got passed, but stuff like really interesting social stuff like the end of life stuff that was going on for euthanasia in New South Wales, that got passed as well. And this is all because, despite having an Opus Dei Premier who is personally morally against it, they ended up voting for it because they are in minority government. So it's kind of an interesting position that they're in right now. So realistically, it's the other groups in Parliament that are holding the Liberals account to kind of get stuff done. So they can go about their day pretending that they're Green, but really the Green is being pushed upon the Greens, by the Greens and the Independents. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that changes should the Liberals get out. Like, are they going to go against the Renewable Energy Zone? They still are processing a whole bunch of coal and gas projects, and they're still going out the door. And also when it comes to development, they're still overdeveloping precious habitat for chlamydia-free koalas. So there's this interesting case in southwest Sydney where they've moved a whole bunch of koalas, or they're trying to move a whole bunch of koalas out of southwest Sydney and move them to a sanctuary in the Southern Highlands, which happens to be owned by the same land as the developer for the land development. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that when it comes to the environment, they wave a flag and say, hey, yeah, we're super green. But really, when you look at it, you get down to brass tacks, it's not as green as you think. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that plays out. I don't know if the Teal movement can mobilise the same amount of anger, back to your question, against Dominic Perrottet and Matt Keane along those same lines. It'll be interesting to see. They're passionate, they're fired up, and when you've got brains like Jackie Scrooby who know climate back to front, I wouldn't be surprised if they're successful.
You mean, so after 12 years in power and on our fourth premier, do you think that the Liberals could win again, or will people think of Albo when they vote for Labor at the state election and Labor gets across the line? It's hard to say. It's going to be a close one.
I honestly don't know. For me, it feels pretty ephemeral. Like I can't get a grip on it at all in terms of what the electorate is feeling. Because here's the thing, anyone who's lived in New South Wales for a long period of time knows what life is like under a Labor government. A lot of, particularly around infrastructure, what Liberals have done have delivered huge amounts of infrastructure in 12 years. They've made the best use of, at the time, low interest rates, and they've digitised they've completely revolutionised Service New South Wales, digitised Service New South Wales. It's actually a joy to interact with the government with Service New South Wales.
We all loved our Gladys dollars on the app that we scanned and got free bowling on.
I don't mind getting a parking fine. It's in the app. I could see it. I can see how many points I've lost by going through that red light. I haven't gone through any red lights, but it's so I can see my working with children card in the app. Everything's on the app, and it's such a joy to do that. And, that's something they've delivered. And sure, a lot of governments over the last 10 years have done that same thing. But particularly when it comes to infrastructure, 12 years ago, there wasn't a metro, there wasn't a new airport.
There wasn't Opal cards.
there wasn't Opal cards, yeah. And remember Labor trying to bring those things in. It was a ball ache. It took forever. The disputes were off the chain. Where the metro was going to go was off the chain. It was all dreadly political, but somehow the Liberals managed to pull off a huge amount of infrastructure in 10 years. The state feels almost a little bit different, but I'm talking about Sydney, of course. I'm not talking about outside of Sydney.
People outside of Sydney will talk about lots of problems with the hospitals and healthcare and stuff. So it's very different outside Sydney. Yeah,
it's very different outside the metro areas. That's for sure. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. I don't know. It could go either way. And is New South Wales ready for a Labor government? Is probably how I would word it if I were running an attack ad this week.
It's interesting
Chris
stuff.
Minns. He looks like a male model, but can he be trusted with the budget?
I think most people in New South Wales is the least parochial state in the country. I think we care the least about local state politics as anyone. So I think most people don't even know the election's on. And when they do go to vote, they'll be like, well, I like the new tunnel. So they might vote for that. Who knows?
Yeah, I like paying $10 driving through the new tunnel. It's wonderful. Thank you.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And on the world stage, we've got two big things this year. We've got King Charles's coronation in May, and COP28 is in Dubai. Let's get the Patreon funded up and go to these. I'm all for it. Patreon.com/irrational fear. Everyone jump on it. What do you reckon?
Dylan, let me tell you this. When the Queen died and everyone had to replace their portraits of the Queen with the King, we bought two from the Australian Monarchists Association, and I promised to give them out to anybody in the next 2 weeks who signed up to the Patreon. No one signed up to get a portrait, a free portrait of King Charles. No one signed up. I think I've done the testing. I've done the market research. This audience does not care about King Charles. We are definitely not going to be covering this in any kind of way.
Hang it behind you. I'll hang it on my wall here. I've got a nice space here.
I mean, his face is okay, but there's not enough room for his hands. His fat fingers really take up a lot of space.
Those big ears take up the whole coin as well.
But COP28 in Dubai, it's one of the not one of the big COPs, so I don't think we've been going there either. But I think. Right. There will be a COP in a couple of years in Australia, and we are actively going to get behind that to get a COP to Australia. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's, for me, in terms of COPs coming up, getting the COP to Australia, the Pacific countries and Australia co-hosting a COP, potentially in Brisbane. I reckon that's a great way to get active and get meaningful action on climate when it's in your own country. I think that's going to be pretty good. And as Australia is still probably one of the worst fossil fuel exporters, one of the worst Scope 3 emitters, probably second or third to Russia and Saudi Arabia, that is a number one priority. You know, imagine if we could use that COP to limit fossil fuel exports and ratchet back fossil fuel exports over the next 10 years. That will be something meaningful for the world. It's pretty interesting. But can I play you a hilarious wacky clip? I don't know if you found this yet. This is a climate-related wacky clip. This is from Liberal Senator Alex Antic, who's asking a question of the Home Affairs boss, Mike Pizzullo, where the department's focus on climate change as a national security risk is parody or comedy. Yes. This is really quite enjoyable from Alex Antic.
So Pizzullo, your opening statement here, which I've got in front of me, you made mention of the fact that the department's work extends to dealing with the effects of climate change.
Yes.
And to better position Australia to deal with the increasing exposure and vulnerability to nationally significant crises, including those due to climate change. With the greatest of respect, is that comedy, parody, or is that serious?
I'm not sure. Are you referring to the question that you've asked me? I don't understand.
No. The suggestion that the Department of Home Affairs is somehow prioritising the issue of climate change. Is that a serious...
Well, I'm not sure if you've noticed the increasing frequency and severity of weather events. We're responsible in supporting the Minister for Emergency Management, who happens to be at the table, with policy and legislative advice. My colleague, the Coordinator General of NEMA, that was questioned this morning, then delivers programs. I genuinely don't know how to respond to a rather oddly put question. You asked me whether it's comedy. It's my job. I don't really understand what you're asking me.
They're just clueless.
Isn't that just amazing?
It's like everyone's house is being destroyed, not an issue of national security. Taking tweezers on an airplane, very important issue of national security.
Yeah. And the millions of people that are going to come to Australia after they become climate refugees, definitely not part of Home Affairs. No, not at all.
Dear.
And here's another great clip from that Senate estimates as well. Senator Antic again.
Well, Mr. Pizzullo, is it safe then to say that the department has been captured by leftist ideology? Is it?
I'm looking forward to hearing this answer.
Yeah, so am I.
Yes, the Department of Homeland Affairs is akin to the Greens. You might as well have Adam Bant running the Home Affairs Department.
Oh my goodness, that was them laughing, not us. Like even they found
That
preposterous.
was Mike Palooza laughing at the dumb question.
And before we go, I think what's going to be the biggest issue of the year, it's looking like inflation and interest rates. How do we stop inflation from going out of control? Any tips, any thoughts, any ideas?
You need to speed up on the spending, Dylan. You need to spend more. And one way you can spend more is go to patreon.com/irrationalfear and drop us $3 a month of your hard-earned cash, and we keep this show on the road.
Or more. You can
rid of that
choose a
money.
higher amount. You don't have to choose one of
Yeah.
the tiers. You can choose a higher amount, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I hear there's a famous comedian in the US. They have a Patreon, which they earn like $300,000 a year on. Oh, sorry, $300,000 a month. And their top tier is called the Rothschild tier. We don't have that, but if you pay us $500 a month, we'll come and do a show live for you somewhere.
All right, so just plug what's coming up with Irrational Fear in the near future. We're going on tour. There's some great gigs coming up, and what's the rest of the year look like as well?
You can go catch us in Adelaide at the Adelaide Fringe Festival, and then you can catch us at Brisbane in QPAC for the World Science Festival. Dylan, we have got incredible guests at that festival, including yourself, Lewis Holber. Mel Buddle is doing that show, also Mark Humphreys, and we have a very special scientist from NASA joining us. Her name is Dr. Christensen, Dr. Jessie Christensen, and she worked on the JWST, the James Webb Space Telescope, and she currently is building a habitat for exoplanets. It's this incredible data set where all the data for every exoplanet they discover goes into this huge database, and people can look it up and find exoplanets and learn more about them, which is amazing. So it's incredible. So we're going to talk to her about aliens, life forms, looking into deep space, and working on JWST and working at NASA. She's Australian, so it's very exciting to have her on the show. And then, of course, April 2nd, we've got the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. That is a huge show. We've called that show Irrational Fear Has Too Many Guests, because it's a 60-minute show, and we have too many guests for 60 minutes. So everyone's going to be limited to about 5 minutes each, but we'll figure out how that goes as we go along. We've got Lewis, myself, Andy McClelton's DJing, Vijay Rajan's doing sketches. We've also got That's What I Reckon, Gabby Bolt, and Alice Fraser. And also Grace Tame is joining us again, as well as Sammy Shah. So another huge show. That show is already about 30% sold. So please get your tickets to that one. That's going to definitely sell out.
And everyone stay subscribed, because you'll have news fighters on here monthly as well, including big wrap of the New South Wales state election next month. Dan, thanks for having me on.
As they say...
No, I'm having you on. Congratulations.
As they say, me podcasta, you sukasa. You su podcasta. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
Good to be with you.